there's just a big stressor happening to the body. There's a ton of internal physiologic shift happening, and your body, it's having to adapt to a new hormonal reality, right? And every
Mhm.
tissue in your body uses these hormones of progesterone and estrogen and testosterone to function, optimally in the way that they have been. And now that is a totally different balance, and you have to reach a new set point. And it's the space in between where a lot of the symptoms happen and things can be difficult.
What's up, ladies? Welcome to the health class She Deserves, the show where we ditch outdated women's health myths and talk real bodies, real cycles, and real stories. I am your host, Autumn Payon, and today we are talking to Dr. Blake Myers. Dr. Blake is a licensed naturopathic doctor, Army veteran, and assistant professor of integrative and functional nutrition at Saybrook University. He specializes in helping women in midlife navigate perimenopause, menopause, and hormone shifts with confidence using root cause natural medicine approaches grounded in science. Drawing from years of clinical experience, Dr. Blake blends functional nutrition, herbal medicine, and integrative care to help women move beyond simply surviving midlife and instead feel strong, clear, and energized in their second act. He's passionate about educating women and the people who support them on what's really happening in their bodies and how to work with those changes, not against them. Dr. Blake, welcome to class.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's start at the beginning of your journey. Did you always want to be a naturopathic doctor working with women in midlife? How did you get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I went into the army right after I graduated high school, and I was a medic in the army, and I was really fortunate in the experience that I actually got to work in a lot of different clinics, including the emergency room. And in the emergency room was really where I decided like that I wanted to be a doctor. I thought that that's kind of the path that I wanted to go of doing emergency medicine, just because I saw such amazing things that doctors were doing in that situation. And but when I got into out of the army and into college, I was doing a pre-med track, and I started my grandparents were still alive, and I saw the conventional medical system and kind of how it was dealing with some chronic illnesses they had, like diabetes and cardiovascular health, and it really was just a lot of medications that were then causing issues that they would have to use other medications, like that whole story. And I just like I was a little disenchanted with it. I started just reflecting on like, okay, is this what I really want to do with my career? Kind of go down this path of learning this kind of medicine. And then I just started getting curious, like, okay, what did people do before, you know, antibiotics and modern medicine and like what were the approaches before? I was like, oh, well, they probably used herbs and, things from nature, right? Like I had no idea. I was just sort of like reflecting on this myself. And so I started searching on the internet one day, natural medicine doctor, and a naturopathic physician came up and Bastyr University came up. Which is where I went to naturopathic medical school. And I spent like 2 hours reading the website, reading about it. And I was just like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. The philosophy resonated deeply about supporting the natural healing mechanisms of the body, treating root causes of illness, especially chronic illness. So that was kinda how I got down that path. In terms of working with women, when I started practicing in 2014, I just was like, I can be primary care for you if you want, whoever wants to show up, whoever needs my support. And so I've seen a 10-day-old, and I've seen, like, a 100-year-old, right? I've seen every age, but, and men and women, but, women are primarily who just has showed up over the years to see me, which is common, especially in healthcare in general, I would say, but especially the sort of alternative medical space. The average patient is, a woman 35 to
Mhm.
maybe 65, and that's been my experience. So it's just been mostly women that have needed my support and kind of in that age range. And so, you mentioned in my bio that I do a fair amount of work in the perimenopause and menopause space, and that's because a lot of my it's a significant life transition for many women. And so, I've had to learn about that and what that experience is like and what's going on and support women through that. But also, obviously plenty of younger women dealing with, various hormonal issues or other health issues, digestive issues, etcetera.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think that that really speaks to the gap that we see in healthcare for women specifically as to, like, why they end up seeking something outside of like what we're conventionally taught in, in the United States and just typically in the Western world, women face a lot of dismissal and gaslighting in the medical system. And I think that there's a lot of wounding there. And so that definitely makes a lot of sense that that was just your experience, that women, especially in that age range, when we kind of just are like, you can't make babies anymore, go away, is the general cultural idea around it. So makes a lot of sense.
One of the things that happens a lot is that, you can have a lot of different symptoms. You can feel really terrible, and it can be very much functional, what we would call functional in terms of different functions in your body are, you know, dysfunctional or imbalanced and can create all manner of what we would consider even chronic illness. But the conventional medical system doesn't tend to do so well with those things, and oftentimes doesn't, practitioners aren't trained in even how to look into those things. If there's not a clear pathology and disease diagnosis, if we can't run these labs that we're familiar with and get, a positive result or a negative result, right? It's like, oh, well, uh, we don't know what's going on and we don't know what to do with you.
Mhm.
Sometimes it gets to the point of like, you can get to the point of blaming the patient of like, well, questioning if they are actually experiencing what they're experiencing. So yeah, that's kind of like the population of women mostly that I've seen have gone through that kind of experience of like being dismissed and not understood or believed sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shame, but I don't find it surprising, even just based on my own experiences. Before we dive into more like specifics with hormones and stuff, I would love if you could just give like a brief overview. You mentioned, in your kind of origin story of how you ended up in naturopathic medicine as opposed to like more conventional med school. Can you just give a brief overview for people who maybe don't know the difference, like what the difference is between those two things? I think there's like a really big misconception online of what naturopathic medicine actually is,
Yeah.
but it's like a very intense training, right?
Yeah, it's 4-year medical school, postgraduate, medical school. So yeah, well, I guess the first thing I would say is there are not every state licenses naturopathic doctors as of yet. I would
Okay.
say more than half do at this point. And that's important to know because if it's a state where naturopaths aren't licensed, anybody could call themselves a naturopathic doctor. And this happens. I lived in Nevada, that's an unlicensed state. And there would be people that were calling themselves naturopathic doctors that did like an online certificate course or something. So it's really important in those sorts of situations that you find out, did the person go to an accredited naturopathic medical school? So that's kind of the first thing to understand, that there's unfortunately some kind of misconceptions to the public in those sorts of situations.
Mhm.
But so in general, in naturopathic medical school, we start out with base hardcore in basic sciences and all of the ology courses, gastroenterology, cardiology, right? All of those. And we're trained to be anywhere from primary care doctors to treating complex chronic illnesses. And so, we're learning diagnosis and standard of care treatment. But one of the ways that I would say the primary way that it differs is that as naturopaths, we have a different philosophy. We have a philosophy that the body inherently wants to move towards wellness, and the body um, has the innate capacity to heal. It's got the mechanisms to heal. It's always the body that heals. Like, you can't give a pill or do a procedure, anything that makes the body heal. It's always the body that's healing. All you can do is facilitate it. So we have the philosophy of that is true. And so how do we facilitate healing? How do we remove obstacles that are in the way to the body getting well? Why is the body not getting well? Like, we're asking those sorts of things. And then our toolbox is huge. Conventional medical practitioner largely has a prescription pad, right? Like, they have pharmaceuticals. As naturopaths, we have those too. It's different state to state scope of practice, but my license is in the state of Washington. I can prescribe medications, I can order MRIs and, you know, diagnose and treat and all of that. But I have a much larger toolbox to use than just prescriptions. I have tools that help me actually stimulate the healing mechanisms of the body, which could be anything from hydrotherapy to herbal medicine approaches or, nutraceuticals. Of course, there's foundational, aspects like diet and lifestyle and movement and all those. So that's kind of the main difference. It's just kind of what are we viewing is our job and what's the best tool for the job in that situation,
Mhm. Mm. I love that perspective of the body is always healing itself. It's really just a matter of helping it out, facilitating it, removing blocks that are in the way. But otherwise, there's nothing like magic externally that is going to just be some magical cure for us. It's always our body's doing the heavy lifting, which I think is just like as a general way to look at life, I think that's really amazing. I think the most successful people in life are the ones who just have this like inherent knowledge of like it all comes from inside me as opposed to like looking for an external validation or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really great philosophy. But let's dive into hormones. So I guess let's just start with kind of more basic. Like, what are the key hormonal shifts that a woman is going to experience throughout her life?
Well, there's this book that, I like called Menopause Brain, and I like this book because she talks about the brain and the nervous system and not just menopause, but she talks about it throughout life, and she talks about the 3 Ps. So there's puberty, pregnancy, and then perimenopause. And so, obviously puberty is like the first primary hormonal shift that's happening, and menstruation starts, you know, sort of could view it as you have a steady state of hormones, so to speak, until you reach kind of the perimenopause stage if you don't go through pregnancy with the monthly cycle that is happening, right? I'm not gonna go into pregnancy, that's a little
Mhm.
different, but, so basically you're kind of in this steady state of reproductive years, and then what happens is sometime typically in the 40s, um, the ovaries are what are primarily producing your sex hormones during your reproductive years. So testosterone, yes, but primarily estrogen and progesterone are what we think of, right? And they're doing this monthly cycle, and then what starts to happen is the egg supply of the ovaries starts to decline, and the communication between the brain and the ovaries, because the brain's really telling the ovaries when to make different hormones and what to do. It's running that cycle. The ovaries are kind of producing them, but the brain's kind of running the show. And as you get to perimenopause and you're typically in your 40s, uh, the the communication starts to sometimes break down a little bit, and the hormones will kind of start to go up and down and get a little wild, and then eventually just decline, and then eventually where you get to menopause where you stop menstruating. But that's kind of the big. I mean, that's really the big change, other than looking at like a monthly cycle, and of course the pregnancy part. But there's plenty within a monthly cycle that many of your listeners are going to understand, like, depending on how that is for them, like a woman can feel vastly different up to 2 weeks out of the month or something, it'd be a very different experience depending on her hormonal balance during her menstrual cycle.
Mhm. And I think perimenopause is kind of viewed as this like mysterious thing, I think culturally, where people are like, I've heard of it, but I don't really like I know my hormones are gonna change, but it kinda just seems like a free for all of what symptoms I'm gonna experience. It seems that women are reporting that doctors aren't really helpful or they like pathologize a lot of the symptoms. So I also think that a lot of people think it happens way like later in life, but it can start earlier than it can start in your 30s, right?
Starting in your 30s, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not
So what are
average, but yeah.
Okay, what are, like, the early signs, I guess, that women should be looking out for, and then how should they navigate those conversations with a provider?
Yeah, a lot of times, well, so one of the kind of the hallmark thing that would be obvious that you are getting to perimenopause would be if, especially if your cycles had always been regular and then they started changing in terms of maybe the flow starts getting heavier, but then now you missed a cycle or something. It's just the cycle starts to change, or sometimes even they can stack a little bit. You can have a
Mhm,
shorter cycle, that sort of thing. Like that, of course, would start to make one think that, oh, there's hormonal shifts happening. Perhaps, I'm reaching, the beginning of perimenopause. But that is not always the first thing that happens. And a lot of times, if you ask women either later in perimenopause or when they're in menopause, if you say, what now looking back, what were the first things that you realized? What do you think the first signs were? And a lot of times women are like, yeah, I didn't realize this was it, but I think the first thing that happened was I started getting anxiety. That's one of the more interesting ones to me because of the way that hormones, especially progesterone, impacts the brain. It's calming to the brain. So anxiety is an interesting one. There can be hair changes, hair texture changes, or hair falling out and things, but also potentially, I would say like maybe a decreased resiliency to stress. And I know these are vague. It's like these things could be happening for many reasons, right? But that's why it's sort of insidious, insidious just meaning that it can slowly come in a way that it's not until later, like, oh yeah, I think that's actually when it was starting. There can be some real changes in during perimenopause in your body's stress response and ability to be resilient to stress, whether it's physical, like infections, let's say, or something, or mental, emotional. So, and then also with that, sometimes it could just be that, you know, everyone has the kind of an internal sense of like, this is me, this is how I feel, this is how I function, right? And it might just be that you start to have a sense of like, something just feels off. Like, I don't quite feel like myself, you know,
Mhm.
broadly. And that could be kind of, that's real to pay attention to as well. Anytime I think that you feel that way, um, because you're your own best guide a lot of times in that. So I know it's a little vague, but that's because it can be vague. But
Mhm.
then outside of those, it could just be that your cycle starts to change and you start to get hot flashes, and maybe your sleep, that would be another one. Sleep disruption is starting. So it's just kind of these different things that a lot of them are connected to the nervous system and the hormonal
Mhm.
impact on the brain.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up the brain, like, pretty much immediately because I think that a lot of people get a little too in the weeds with things and, like, very, technical with what's happening in, like, the endocrine system, the reproductive system, and all of that, but when you zoom out and look at the entire body, brain included, that's tends to be the most disruptive, I would think, at least, from the women in that age group in my life that I've talked to about this, like, that seems to be the most disruptive thing is those brain changes. And as you talked about before, the connection between the brain and the ovaries and how that's being affected during perimenopause. So if a woman is kind of like feeling this, like you said, I don't really feel like myself, something feels like it's changing. I think there's this sort of narrative that, oh, it's completely unavoidable. It's something you're just going to deal with. It's going to be
Yes.
absolute hell, have fun. What obviously that's like damaging and not necessarily true. So how
Yeah.
can we like be shifting that? What should women be focusing on to ease this transition
Mhm.
into a different stage of life?
Yeah. So I get that question a lot about what can I do to prepare for this? And I mean, one of the ways that I view health and illness and healing and all that is just, it's essentially, it comes down to your body's ability to adapt to stressors of various sorts. Everything is a stressor to the body. There's always stressors going on, and you're always adapting. And as long as you're adapting, you don't know there's nothing wrong. You don't have symptoms. You feel fine, right? But the second that an adaptive capability starts to become overcome is when we could get sick with a cold or something, or we start to break down and feel burnt out mentally, emotionally, these sorts of things, right? And so through that lens, you can kind of view what's happening in perimenopause and then into menopause is that there's just a big stressor happening to the body. There's a ton of internal physiologic shift happening, and your body is having to it's having to adapt to a new hormonal reality, right? And every
Mhm.
tissue in your body uses these hormones of progesterone and estrogen and testosterone to function, optimally in the way that they have been. And now that is a totally different balance, and you have to reach a new set point. So it's kind of going from like here to this different set point, and it's the space in between where a lot of the symptoms happen and things can be difficult. So what you can do to support yourself in preparation, I would say, is support your resiliency, your body's adaptability in all ways, so that time in between can go as easy as possible. And so a lot of that comes down to things that wouldn't be a surprise in terms of, kind of foundational pieces of your health, but focusing on how are you feeding yourself and how is your diet right now? Like if you getting your dietary and other lifestyle practices in a way that it's just habitual. Like, this is how I live my life. Like, this is how I eat. This is how I move my body. so that because it's a lot easier when you're younger to not have to be so on top of all those things typically because we're more adaptable and resilient when we're younger. And so it's sometimes easy, I think, for people to let certain things slide because they could, but then all of a sudden now there's this perimenopause thing that you're dealing with, and you're like, crap, I really have to start moving my body and exercising. And it's a lot harder than you're kind of behind the curve at that point, if that makes sense. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you shouldn't and that it won't help if you start doing it then. It's just that in preparation, having the healthy lifestyle habits in place is going to really help. And if there's any other health issues that you're dealing with, manage those and treat those appropriately. Like, I mean, it could be anything really. That could essentially make, if that's not managed well, that may come back to kind of haunt you a little bit and make it even worse through that time. So like diabetes, for example, if you've got diabetes, it's like make sure that's well managed because blood sugar regulation and metabolism is one of the things that changes a lot during perimenopause. And so that might really throw you off and cause a lot more like symptoms and difficulty, right? As one example. So, take care of your health in those ways and make sure that you're prioritizing it and recognizing that it's not just about like uh we're all going to age, we're all going to get older, right? And like, oh, I should take care of myself so that I age healthy and well. Of course, yes, but women have this unique thing that they're going to experience that hasn't really been talked about a lot until more recently. Like most women going through perimenopause now will say like, "Yeah, I didn't know anything about this or that this was coming. My mom didn't talk about it, my grandmother didn't talk about it." So, it is important, I think, for women to know that, like, it's not like it doesn't have this big scary thing, but it's just
Mhm.
like, yeah, this is going to come and it's going to be a different thing than just like normal aging. It's going to be a transitional, transformative kind of experience. And so, yeah, just being aware that, yeah, I want to take care of myself for when this comes.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you said that also because I think the reason that it seems like big and scary is because it's hitting women out of nowhere. Like you said, people aren't talking about it. It's been such a taboo thing. And I like applaud Gen X women like all day long of the way that they are using social media to bring these things to the forefront, make it a more normal part of the
Yeah.
conversation. And it's just like imagine, and I know this does happen to some girls, but imagine no one ever told you what a period was. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden you go through this like crazy hormonal change and you start bleeding and you're like, what the hell's going on? Like you would think you're dying. And I think it's
Yeah.
even though it's the opposite, more of like less blood when you're getting older, there's still that emotional and like just internal sense of who you are in your body that changes really majorly. And the last time that that happened was either, like you said, if you were pregnant or during puberty a very long time ago, and you can feel like something's seriously wrong. You could feel like you're dying. I think that's why it tends to be really scary for a lot of women is we're not talking about it. So yeah, I think it's amazing that this generation is making this a big part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's so important. And I think you just touched on an important piece that one thing that commonly comes up, I mean, yeah, people might talk about hot flashes and difficulty sleep and all this sort of thing, but you just touched on an important piece of self-identity and feeling comfortable in your body and how and like the person that you're looking at in the mirror and like that all of that, right? Because that is a big piece that can shift is that if you think about the way that we identify with ourselves, any of us, it's we identify typically with our physical body. We identify with our thoughts. We identify with, how do I show up in relationships? How does my brain function when I'm at work, right? How do I behave when there's a stressful event? Like all these things, right? It's just all of these things kind of go into the pool of our identity of oneself. And so all of those things can start to shift for women during perimenopause. And, especially when there's things like brain fog coming up, feeling fatigue, and they used to be energized and like don't have the stamina for working out that they used to, and libido going down, just all kinds of different things. It can kind of sum up to just like, who is this person? Who am I? And that can be a really difficult part of the transition as well. And that can just come to a new place eventually where like most women will just like sometimes it's a new version of them. A lot of times it's a
Mm.
true transformation in terms of how people view themselves and see their role in their lives. which is beautiful. But getting to that new sense of like, yeah, this is who I am, and I actually love this person, even maybe even more than I did before or something,
Hmm.
it's kind of that process of getting there that it's like, can feel like the dark night of the soul or something, when it's like you're sort of you could be like all over like who am I? I don't recognize myself. And so just yeah, just being aware that I think like, those things can come up, but it's also normal and natural and it's okay. Like, you know, you're going to come to a new place of seeing yourself in a new way if you need to. And it will be beautiful. Just trusting that the process is that it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really great reframe for women kind of going through that as because it can feel like a complete loss of identity, like you're saying. And that's very disorienting. And there's not some big event. Like I feel like other times that you might go through that in life, there's a big sort of event, whether it's, something like in a relationship or something traumatic possibly, and, like, you can kind of connect the dots, I guess, as to, like, why something changed or why your identity shifted, but I think for
Mhm.
something like perimenopause, it's, like you said, a process. It's this more gradual sort of thing that, again, we're not talking about enough. That can be so disorienting, I would imagine, of, like, nothing happened, I'm not doing anything differently, but something is changing, and it feels
Yeah.
completely out of my control. Also, like you were saying before with some of, like, the lifestyle changes and building those habits early so that so that your body is better prepared for this shift. What I've kinda heard from women in this age group is along the lines of, like, I thought I was being really healthy. I thought I was, doing all these things that were supporting my body, and I didn't change anything. But all of a sudden, I'm carrying a lot of weight in my midsection, and
Yeah.
I'm exhausted all the time. And they're just confused because they were like, "Well, I thought I was taking care of myself, and now I feel like what I was doing before is just not working anymore." Do you have advice for somebody who's maybe in that situation where they're like, I'm at a loss?"
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So that's common and makes sense with a lot of the metabolic shifts that are happening. It's important to not, don't blame yourself. Don't hold guilt or blame that you're doing something wrong. You probably were doing the things right that you needed to do. And it might just be that now there's different approaches or different things that your body needs at this time. And so it doesn't, there doesn't have to be any like, oh, I was doing it right and now doing it wrong. It's just a lot if your body and mind are going through a big shift, there's probably a lot of other things that have to shift in your life, right? Behavioral things have to shift. Like maybe now you need to go to bed at a different time or wake up and do something different with your morning, or like there's so many examples of things that could shift. So, but yeah, there's a lot of metabolic shifts that happen, and there's a redistribution, especially with the decline in estrogen that happens. Women will tend to have a tendency to accumulate more visceral fat. So that is like fat that, yes, around the midsection, but visceral fat also is like not outside the muscles, but like inside your belly.
Mhm.
Your viscera are your organs. And so can get more fat accumulation there. And that can be a bit of a snowball effect of some issues if you don't do something with that, because that fat in the viscera tends to be more inflammatory. So you'll get more inflammation, which causes worsening of symptoms and things, and that will mess up blood sugar regulation and kind of cause more visceral fat. So it's a bit of a cycle that it's good to notice if that's happening and just start to make some shifts. So one of the things that is not for everyone, but it works well for a lot of people is to I recommend women to experiment with intermittent fasting during this time of life, not necessarily so much, in your 20s and 30s, unless there are
Mhm.
particular health issues, maybe it would be
Right.
helpful. But intermittent fasting is when my approach is that you're not trying to eat any less calories in a 24-hour window. It's just that you're eating the same amount potentially in a shorter amount of time in the 24 hours. So um, when a lot of times people will wake up and they like have a breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between and that, and so it could be kind of an all day thing. And the only time they're not eating is maybe it's a window while they're sleeping because maybe they're eating like shortly before bed or whatever. So um, the probably the best range for most people to be in is a 16-8. So that's 16 hours of fasting, and it's an 8-hour window where you eat um, your calories. And I usually recommend, if you haven't done anything like that before, like just work into it slowly. It's pretty easy for most people to start at 12:12. If you go to bed at, if you eat your last meal at 8 at night, don't eat until 8 the next morning. And a lot of people are already doing that. But, that's an easy starting point. And then you work into like a 14-10, so 14-hour studying, and then the 16-8. Some people go past that, but uh, it's helpful because during this fasting window, your body will start to burn more fat during that. But also there's this process of cellular turnover that happens where old you know, cells that aren't functioning as optimally, maybe they're not metabolically functioning as well, the body will get rid of those and build new cells. And the body will get rid of old mitochondria and build healthy new mitochondria. And mitochondria are the energy producers in cells, and they're what run metabolism and essentially, what you eat when it gets all the way broken down, it's what turns it into energy that your cells can use. So intermittent fasting can be really helpful for energy and shifting slow metabolism. And the other thing that I would say is resistance training. So that is a really important thing for a lot of women when they're younger that I would recommend is cardio is fine, but don't get overly focused on cardio and not focused on also building muscle and healthy lean muscle. That is one of the best things that you can do to protect yourself through the menopausal transition and age healthy. And it's the same thing if there's any women in perimenopause or menopause listening to this and wondering about your question about visceral fat and energy, inflammation, any of that. One of the best things you can do is start to build muscle. You're not going to get huge and bulky and look ripped or something, but you you will start to feel more solid in your body, and you'll start to notice your energy go up, and it will help your basal metabolic rate go up, which is just the amount of calories that you're burning just when you're sitting down or sleeping or whatever. So your body will be burning more calories anyway, and it will protect your bones, it will decrease inflammation, so many things. So that's like another really foundational thing, and I don't tend to see women focusing on that as much as maybe the cardio aspects. And so I always try to plug that of, do some resistance training, whether it's bands, but lift heavy enough, push it so that you're actually sore and you're going to build muscle. And you have to get enough protein to build muscle as well, right?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought that up because I think, yeah, like you said, women tend to shy away from the resistance and like muscle training. And there's so many, I feel like that's like an entire cultural like rabbit hole we could go down of why that is. But I do think you touched on an important one that I heard from like a lot of my friends in college and stuff when I would be like, no, weightlifting is like so important, you
Hmm.
know, running's like fine, it's great, but there's a lot more benefits that you can get from switching out some of those days of just straight cardio with some resistance training or weight training. And that was the main thing is like, well, I don't want to get bulky or like I build muscle really easily and I don't want to like look like a man. And I'm like, you're not like,
Yeah, it's
you're
not
not
going to
going
happen.
to.
Not going to
You're,
happen.
yeah. And it's, I mean, because your testosterone levels just wouldn't be high enough, right? For that
Yeah.
level.
I mean, yeah, for one. And I mean, it's people, man or woman, it doesn't matter. Anyone who's looking bulky and ripped, they're working hard at it. Like they
Mhm.
like they are lifting intensely and they're like counting their macros and like, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And if they stop doing that, then they would stop it's not like, I mean, some people may have a naturally sort of larger body, but in terms of muscle mass. But yeah, in general, it's like, no, like it's not the standard that you're just going to be able to easily do that. But you will feel so much differently in your body if you haven't done resistance training and you start to do it after a month, 2 months, even like you'll really start to feel like something shifts internally. And uh, it's just such an important thing. And the cardio is also important to know that doing too much cardio will increase your cortisol levels. And cortisol is your stress hormone, your a primary stress hormone, and it's related to your stress response and resilience. And cortisol, and when it's elevated, well, you can sort of you can feel anxiety and anxious from it, but it will shift your metabolism. It will shift your body fat distribution towards uh, abdominal and visceral fat.
Mhm.
So it's like another one of those things that if that's happening in midlife, you don't necessarily want to overdo the cardio. Like, yeah, it'll burn calories, but you need to think about, you know, the cortisol hormonal impacts and how is your stress response already? Because that whole system of the brain and adrenal connection, cortisol during perimenopause is one of the things that can easily get dysregulated. And that's why sleep can get messed up and emotional resiliency and mood shifts and stuff like that. So just another like reason to I think, take it easy on the cardio. It's fine, but
Yeah.
don't overdo it.
Mhm. Yeah, and quite honestly, when I, like, kinda learned that and started doing more weightlifting, I was like, "Thank God." Like, I was just like, cardio would just exhaust me, and, like,
Yeah.
I would tend to do it in the mornings, sometimes even before breakfast, which, like, now I'm, like, horrified that I ever did that when I was in college, and, yeah, it would just I would be exhausted for the rest of the day. Like, I would nap, and I never have been much of a napper, and yeah, weightlifting really did change my life for the better. So if anyone's like listening and they're still
Yeah.
kind of on the fence, I promise it's a
That's
very
awesome.
different feeling.
Yeah. Did your energy increase? And
Yeah,
actually, like, yeah.
it did. And I've always been kind of like tall and lanky and hypermobile and just not very like physically strong. And it was
Yeah.
always kind of like an insecurity growing up. And
Yeah.
was always kinda like, I would be called, like, baby giraffe, and,
Uh,
like, I was not very graceful.
yeah.
So, when I started weightlifting, there was a big, like, confidence component as
Yeah.
well, and even looking at me, I still didn't look very, like, built. I wasn't, visibly putting on muscle. I was not eating in, like, a excess or anything or counting macros. I just felt so much stronger, and I kind of
Hmm.
started to, like, not know my own strength. Like, I would kinda realize when I would just be doing normal things, like putting a glass down or something, like, it was just, like, a little bit of a difference where I was like, "Oh, that was harder than I meant it to be."
Yeah.
So yeah, it's empowering for sure, and I think so many women are steered away from it, for so many different reasons, and we are, with the rise of GLP-1s right now, we're really in a bit of a crisis when it comes to body image and being way, way, way too skinny as a
Yeah.
culture, and so I think it's kind of an act against the patriarchy to build muscle. I think it's like
Absolutely.
defiance. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, the patriarchy and its impact on, trying to keep women in a particular role and keep women looking in a certain way is like obviously nothing new, but you are right. We are sort of reaching this other level now where we've got these medications that contribute
Mhm,
that feed into that narrative. And I think it's such an important narrative for, I mean, like I feel like it's a radical act of feminism for a woman to stand up against that and say like, no, it's not about how I look for you at all. It's actually about
mhm,
how I feel. And it's
mhm,
about how I feel in my body. So totally advocate for women to take that role. I also tell women, it's like, if you can help it, just get rid of the scale. Like, the scale is not your friend. It's about how you feel, you know? It's like the women in my life or that I work with, it's like, I want you to feel good. I want you like, and I want you to be happy and joyful. And I want you to feel strong. And like, you know, all the other stuff is
mhm,
noise, uh,
mhm.
it really like because
Yes.
none of that is really what matters, but it's easy to feel like that's what matters when, um, there's consistent messaging being put in front of you, like, God, social media especially, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Absolutely, and I second the getting rid of the scale. Don't like, especially if you are gonna start weightlifting and putting on muscle, the number's gonna go up. Like,
yeah,
muscle weighs a lot more, and I remember when I started weightlifting, I did have a scale at my parents' house that I would use sometimes, and it can be triggering. We're so ingrained with the numbers, but it's a good thing, actually. when you're
Yeah.
putting on muscle. So, yeah, this was such an incredible conversation, Dr. Blake. I do have one last question I like to ask all of my guests at the end,
Okay.
and you can really take this in any direction that you would like. But if you could rewrite the health class curriculum that every woman deserves, what would your first lesson be?
Mm. Rewrite the curriculum. I would say to trust yourself and your personal wisdom and your own inner knowing about what is good for you and what you need, and to what does it look like to listen to yourself and honor yourself and follow your path without relying on external sources for for all of the journey, and like what does it look like to make your personal journey in that, and what does it look like to make yourself a priority? How do you first have confidence in yourself and prioritize yourself and not put other people's needs first, and trust that if you take care of yourself and make yourself a priority, that that is the best way that you can also then show up for others in your life that you care about and that you want to take care of. That would probably be the first thing.
I love that. That's incredible. And, just imagine an entire generation of young girls raised on that ideology. Like, we'd be
Mhm.
unstoppable.
I
So,
know.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Blake. It was such an awesome conversation. I'm excited for everyone to hear it. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can go to thebridgesystemmethod.com. You can go on social media. I'm on all the socials at the Bridge System, and that's the name of my business that kind of does, all the education and things around, and I have a book through that as well. Through so on all the social medias at the Bridge System, you can find me.
Amazing. And I'll make sure that's linked for everybody below in the show notes. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you send this episode to a friend or maybe to your mom who is going through some of these changes. And class dismissed.